Welcome to the Meta, episode 37. So let's start in the background while I'm speaking. If you end up watching this rather than listening to it while you're doing something else, we're going to be watching Tassinix. So it's sort of unfortunate Tassinix doesn't have more traction on YouTube. I know he's popular on Twitch, on YouTube. I guess it's sort of like this channel. He doesn't post a lot on a regular basis. Anyway, welcome to the show. If this is the first time you're listening to the show, this is basically where we look at the competitive GAC meta and talk about where it is, where it's going, what's happened the last season, what's happening the next season. I don't really want to say predictions, but where I see the meta going in general. I'm seeing now in the background here. One thing about Tassinix that let's skip ahead a little bit here. One thing about Tassinix that you may find complicated is that it's educational, fantastic, like GAC stuff to watch. But he talks about his thought process in entirety, and the whole stream is posted on YouTube. So he does put timestamps so you can skip through it pretty easily, but it's great if you have time to listen to how somebody thinks through their counters. Anyway, back to the show. So who am I? Why should you care? I'm like 11.5 million GP. The top 100 of GAC normally, or top 10 if I really am trying hard and get some good luck on my side. Trying hard has not been there recently. I really am enjoying, funnily enough, I'm enjoying GAC a lot the past few months, but I just don't feel there's a big reason to like spend a lot of extra time, not that I have a lot of extra time, to try for the tippity top. It's very different, like top 30-ish, I would say, compared to the top 100, compared to the top 200 or 300, in terms of how much preparation you need to do and what you can expect from your opponent. Anyway, I watch a huge amount of GAC fights, so I can sort of see what's happening on a larger basis. I do a lot of research as well, more so for the counter tool and some other stuff we're doing there. Anyway, I watch a lot of fights, so I see what's happening. And I love GAC. It's my favorite part of the game by far. So I do this once a month. Still trying to work on the podcast thing, just haven't had time. So the format of this is split into four broad areas. One is 3v3, then we go 5v5, then ships, and the game state. And in particular, I talk about each of the 3v3 and the 5v5 sections with only the datacrons that are available for that, or for the current time in the meta. So it's not meant as a looking at particular teams so much as team and datacron combination, what happened, for example, in last 3v3, what parts of it may be applicable to next, and the same with 5v5, although sort of like a new 5v5 in terms of datacron combinations. So let's move on here to the 3v3, which was datacron set 6 and set 7 together. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because it's mostly looking at the past, but I will talk a bit about stuff that I found interesting. And I think in general, I think it's something, the trend will continue in terms of the impact of datacrons. I'll talk about this a bit more in like the future meta near to the end. But I've noticed that the last two sets, well, even set 5 was not crazy. Nothing like the set 4 Dodge and Empire DC. Ugh. That was two things very powerful in the same set. Anyway, I think that we're going down a road. I'll talk about that in the meta section. So DCs in general and in this 3v3 season didn't have a huge impact. I mean, some particular sets or some particular level 9s were really good. 50 shorties or 5-0 RTs in particular was a match ruiner. But especially because in general the level 3 and the level 6 abilities weren't like faction defining. There was no turn meter, tank revive, etc. like they have in in set 6. Good, helpful level 3s, but nothing hugely powerful. Level 6s, I think, were amazing, or are amazing, but not as much in 3v3. In 5v5, you're going to see a much larger impact of the level 6s. But really, in 3v3, of course, there's some really good ones in there, but I mean, overall, there's some really good Datacrons. But most of those are at level 9, and not like hugely, it didn't define a season, like very little frustration in general. I mentioned that, I think, at the end of my notes here. So a lot of the problems in the first week were people just not thinking through things. It's totally normal every time we have a new DC set. In 3v3 is the first time we see a new DC set, so that's like extra, it's like double. People aren't as comfortable in general in 3v3. And a whole new set means you tried a bunch of new things in the first week. There's no stats on it. So interestingly, at the end of the season, well, throughout, but especially at the end when Tusken, Chieftain, and Warrior, and Boba Fett were there with Chieftain's 3v3 Omicron, what a horrible team. In a good way, like horrible for the defensive player, horrible for the offensive player, great for the defensive player. I think that's going to continue with the next set, no matter what it is. It might even be Tuskens, Separatists, Dark Side, Unaligned Force users. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I talked about that last episode anyway. I think it's still going to be that. But that's a strong team. Tuskens in general are great. I think we'll see quite a bit of them in 5v5 too. Zori was great. She also has her DC, which makes her extra great, and that's going to be there for our next 3v3 season. Whether with Finn or Rey, both very good, just slightly different requirements of the counter. She'll be better potentially in next 3v3 season because there's no longer the no revive prawn from set 6. Whether there's a replacement with the next set of Datacrons, who knows? But losing no revive is going to make Rey even more difficult, or Rey and Ben even more difficult. Shorty, man, she has some hard counters, and plenty of people beat her, but I saw her ruin full clears more than any other character. Tusken is up there too, but Tusken actually, the Chieftain in particular, has a bit more options for full clear. And generally, people were respecting him a bit more, or I think people weren't quite knowing what to expect with Shorty, with her level 9, and oftentimes would just like come up flat against it and couldn't clear. It's very interesting to see. As I mentioned earlier, very less frustrating. No overpowered level 9s. No extremely prevalent and difficult to deal with level 3s like the Turn Meter or Tank Revive. So yeah, I would say a pretty good Datacron set. I was quite happy with it. And I think it'll be more powerful in 5, so we'll see how it goes. Yeah, as I mentioned, losing the set 6 stuff for next 3v3 season is going to be very interesting. We don't know what it's replaced with for now. Stats were nice, but yeah, the stats were nice as well, mostly having defense as opposed to armor and resistance separated. But mostly it's losing the level 3s and some of the level 9s, especially Aphra. Aphra's not going to be nearly as powerful without her level 9 next 3v3 season. Hondo is still going to be great, especially since there's smuggler options with this current set. And in general, like Hondo is beating Malgus, for instance, without his Datacron. So I'm sure he'll continue to do so even without set 6. But still, it's going to be a big change for 3s. I think Rey in general is going to get a lot more powerful. Mostly Rey, just because that's the Rey and Ben. You have a no revive that you can use now and you won't have then, but we'll see how it goes. So, 5v5 with set 6 and set 7. I think this is going to be an awesome season. An amazing season. Partially because of the Datacron combination. I think set 7 has I mentioned like 17 times now, a huge benefit to the 5v5 format compared to 3v3. The level 6s in general are great. But I think mostly it's because of the new characters we have. It's unquestionable that we've entered a new power tier for the game. I'll talk a little bit more about this in detail, well, a lot more about it probably in detail at the game state section. But all of the new characters since Zori, basically, um, have introduced a new power level. Some are extremely noticeable, like I think mostly Cal and Seer, and they don't even have their full team yet. So I'm sure Cal Kestis, whatever, I forget his full name, the new one that is the journey. Tuskens, definitely, and Riva, of course. Riva is like the perfect example, or a very strong example, but all of the other characters are completely invalidating entire team dynamics, turn meter, speed, burst damage. All of those are sort of being canceled. I wouldn't say canceled, but nullified to a large extent with the introduction of these new characters. And you can see that it's like there's a big shift happening in the power level. I think the next year is going to be a whole new set of strong type of characters that will potentially, after 12 to 18 months, 1.5 years, be taught. I would say half of the teams are going to be totally replaced power level wise in GAC and territory wars and stuff. So I think that's one of the big reasons why 5v5 is going to be interesting, because we have Tuskens, we have Cal, we have Seer, we have Riva. Not everybody, of course, but for not including Riva, because she's a 7-star unlock, the other ones are very usable. Even in like Kyber, well, for sure. I mean, in Kyber 1 and in Kyber 2, the Tuskens are usable, not at relics. It's amazing. So, yes, we just have Arena and TW testing. Most people don't see TW stuff because it tends to be sort of insular to guilds, although there's more and more content creators sharing TW content, which is pretty awesome on YouTube. But Zori and Cal are sort of the most valuable right now. Of course, Riva, but Riva is not going to be popular for another, the top of K1 and some K2 for sure, but probably another like 2 or 3 months before a lot of people have her. Right now, it's only, I think, a bit less than 600 after this last territory battles. Set 6 is going to be the offensive set. Set 7 is going to be the defensive set, broadly speaking, just because set 6 is so powerful with no revive, TM generation, etc. Yeah, like I said, 5v5 makes it a little more powerful. I think one of the most popular content to see, or what people will be searching for, again, assuming a lot of the people are in Kyber 1 or Kyber 2, is how to beat Riva. I think the secondary territory battles will be completed before the next territory battle will be completed before the end of 5v5. I forget off the top of my head. If so, the last week of 5v5 will be a big mess. There'll be probably double the amount of Rivas out there. So Cal is actually a popular character on some teams to beat Riva. You can also use JMK and some mall setups. Nothing, and we don't have a lot of testing. We had 0 testing in 5v5 and GAC. So we don't know the exact reliability of everything yet. But I think that's going to be a challenge. We'll see if they make any changes to her or not. Probably they'll fix the purge bug. Maybe fix her R8 to R9 scaling to adjust that, which is actually a buff to her. Tuskens are going to be amazing, especially in 5v5. I think Tuskens in 5v5 is sort of, in terms of how powerful it is, in my head at least, I equate it to like using the set 6 20% TM Datacron on troopers. It just, you're able to beat so many things simply with this one ability. The one ability with using Tusken Chieftain, obviously, is that when units are targeting a Tusken, they gain turn meter, they'll be stunned, unresistible stun, not unevadable. Like units can still be immune to stun, you know, like GLs and stuff, but incredibly powerful ability when used against certain teams. So sort of like think of like Jawas versus Mon Mothma, you know, that type of interaction where, I mean, yes, you obviously have to some gear levels for some of the Tuscans that'll be exposed to the attacks. Can't just die. You know, a gear 8 is not gonna, an AoE from, you know, Dark Trooper is gonna decimate your entire squad if they're all gear 8. But still, conceptually, the synergy with the Tuscans versus certain teams is great, and you don't need relic levels to make it useful. Like Mara Jade, when she first came out, using her in a Palpatine team versus a number of stuff was very good. So mechanics wise, cool stuff to take use of. Even Cal, I mean, it's sort of not as good necessarily in the upper ranks because you're going to want to use a Datacron on your Ray team or your light side teams in general. But if you're at the stage where you don't have Datacrons for every single team, Cal with his passive stat boosts is great for Ray teams. And you don't need any, there's no specific gear level for that to be applicable. So, interesting. Funnily enough, I think we're looking at Cal's, that's some funny timing. Cal's unique. Pass it into the screen. Ships. Ships are in a pretty good place. There's not really anything that's changed since last month. It's pretty much the same, pretty balanced state. The Executor and the 2-3 attackers are the most complicated to deal with, unless you keep Profundity for offense, in which case, I guess it's still possible to lose. I mean, it is still possible to lose, but very, very difficult if you know how to play it. The rest of the meta is mostly, in my opinion, where you use your Empire. Like, are you expecting to face Profundity on defense, so you keep TIE Defender and Executrix on offense? Or, like most people, does your opponent keep Profundity for offense, so you place your Executor, and then you keep half of your Empire team for offense against like Negotiator or something like that? This to me is where most of the questions lie, and again, just like before, it's all just a banner calculation. So you figure out what has the highest chance of winning and highest banners. There's not a lot of options, to be honest, if you're going for a highest chance of winning plus highest chance of banners. Counterplay versus some players is a different question. If your rosters aren't quite at the same level, or you have a big advantage or disadvantage, you know, depending on what fleets you have available, then it's a bigger, more complicated question. But in general, ship meta is in a great place, I think. Although, now that we know there's another Sith ship coming, a Ravager, most likely. Who knows what that's going to do? Is that going to be like Profundity level? Is it going to Profundity Executor level? Is it going to go one above Profundity Executor? We don't know. Be curious to see though. But it's sort of nice. I'm enjoying the ship meta for now. It's a good one. I'm not going to repeat all of this, but take a look to read it. The principle of this is, and I had some good discussions on the YouTube comments last time. The principle is the majority of RNG from ships is from an imbalance in gear levels. But if you know what those breakpoints are, Profundity, it was a great point that people made before, Profundity with the assists to get to ult is a different question altogether, but that has nothing to do with gear levels. That's just a random chance. And from my perspective, facing equally geared, almost everything R9 or some R8 fleets, this has never stopped me from using Profundity versus Executor, for instance. It's still very controllable, but it can be frustrating from an RNG perspective how fast you get to ult if you're in a mirror situation or something like that. Anyway, the whole point is there's not a huge amount of RNG in fleets. It's mostly pilot gear relic level, which is controllable. It's just very hard to test for because most of the videos, counters, etc. don't show those, so you can't tell. All right, game state meta. So it is a big difference in the last month. With the new characters, some experimenting with set 7, seeing how this plays out. Balance-wise, I think this year is we have entered a new power tier. So I talked about it a little bit in 3v3 and 5v5. So the way that I classify it in my head, I'm putting everything prior to GLs in one large bucket, which is not entirely fair. There was a good, depending on how refined you want to look at it, there was 27 metas during that stage. They changed a lot with each new character. Well, not each new character, but many new characters or reworks to existing characters when Arena was the meta. But I'm broadly grouping it across the game as a whole in terms of power. Pre-GLs, then you had GLs, whole new power tier. Within the GL power tier, you had smaller little, okay, what counted this GL that wasn't a GL? And that changed quite a bit. But the concept was definitely there. It adjusted a little bit near the end of the GL era when they did the defense nerf, as many people call it, but the defense rebalancing, which was fantastic. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this balance we had now. But that changed quite a few things. But still, it was GLs or things that could be GLs and then everything else. Then, after that, we went into the Datacron era. And that was especially the first 4 Datacron sets. Probably the first 5? Maybe? I guess, yeah. We can call them the first 5 Datacron sets, where if you had the correct Datacron, not necessarily just a level 9, but level 3, level 6, level 9, oftentimes with stats, especially if you're going for dodge, that is what was hard to beat. It wasn't necessarily just the characters, and oftentimes the characters didn't matter as much. You needed maybe, on a 5-man team, you needed 3 characters. Then you just needed the Datacron. Sometimes you only needed 1 character, Lord Vader, and the Datacron, and there was very few teams that could beat that. But it was all about the Datacron. The characters were, frankly, less important. Characters' mods oftentimes didn't matter a great deal. Again, we're not looking at the tippity top where both of the opponents have almost identical rosters, and it's really about how you allocate your mods or the style of stats on your Datacron and stuff like that. But as a broad power statement, I'm saying for a good probably 6-8 months, Datacrons were the main source of meta-defining power. And now I feel we've gone to another level where they've both adjusted down the Datacron power a little bit, which I think is great, much more usable and less frustrating. And they have started introducing a new type of character that will win, or will be the defining factor in a win, regardless of what the Datacron is. Reva is a great, I call her Reva and Reva back and forth, I'm not sure which it is, so please correct me. Or I could just, probably after this video is over, I'll go look and not fail on this in the future. But Reva is a great example where, with or without Datacron, although GI's set 6 Datacron is amazing on the team, she can beat most anything in the game. Other characters like Cal, Zori, Seer, mostly I would say Zori and Cal fit that bar. They don't need Datacrons, and they will make their team so much more powerful than they are without. They will allow that team to beat a much broader range of teams, and in some cases can beat almost any other team in the game, just because of the addition of that character. So I think we will continue to see more and more of these throughout this next, I mentioned earlier, I think 12 to 18 months, maybe less. I mean, maybe they'll introduce a new element, could be 7.mods or something that will change the power structure again, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be new characters or some new game modifier in the future, or maybe even a new game mode that reprioritizes how people build their rosters. But the point of what I'm saying, we've entered a new era, a new meta. Not a new meta, it's new metas all the time, but like a new era of power, a new tier of power. And that is like the post-Datacron era. We're going back into new characters that, well, you could say we're going back to characters, but these characters, none of them are GL so far. So it'll be interesting when the next GL comes out, I'm assuming it's going to be Leia, how she fits into the power structure. But so far, it's very interesting that the last few months, it has been characters that are not GLs that are so powerful. Very interesting. And you know what? Actually, this is a great example. I think most people won't really appreciate it, but Raven's Claw, the rebel ship, the gerbil. He does a lot of great videos. Great guy. I really enjoy his videos a lot. A little bit for GAC, but mostly just like his style of making videos. And he tends to put out some content that's really unique and has an interesting perspective on the game that covers a lot of things that I normally wouldn't otherwise pick up on. Anyway, the Raven's Claw is a great example where this ship is incredibly valuable to newer players. And I think a lot of these changes are aimed, obviously, if you have incredibly powerful characters that are not GL gated, or like Reva is a great example. Yes, you have to be in a guild that can get her shards, but all the unlock requirements are basically available for everybody. Not cheap, not easy, but very reasonable for new players to go after Reva once they reach a certain GP level that they can join a bigger guild that gets her shards. So still end game, but like you don't have to unlock 27 other characters to get her, is what I'm saying. And Raven's Claw is similar, but for a much lower GP range, where in fleets, it gives you a huge flexibility to do a bunch of things that otherwise you would have needed an entire fleet to build, because Home 1 is a pretty cheap fleet when you start out. The Rebels anyway you need for various unlocks and stuff like that. So from, again, my perspective is the CG is definitely shifting the balance. Datacrons do a lot for newer players. Like you can adjust your team's power level without getting the most amazingest mods, which is purely an overtime thing. And you don't need all the super uber characters if you have a Datacron that can boost your whole team. So I think there's going to be a continued focus towards helping out newer players. Tippy top, we're going to stay at the tippy top because they have all the resources and oftentimes spend money. But for other players to be able to compete without being 7 years into the game or 4 years into the game or something like that, I think you're going to have more and more opportunities, which is awesome. And I think that, so yeah, again, I sort of summarize this down here. I think that for GAC, like that's an interesting concept because right now GAC is mainly, I mean, the competition is obviously awesome. If you enjoy fighting against other players, which is great for me, and then for many people, then people are always going to enjoy GAC, and they get good crystal rewards, which is very important for developing your roster, making the most out of what you have. But I think there needs to be some additional faster competitive game mode. Like the downside of GAC is it's like at a minimum a week of your time, you know? Obviously not, like each match is 24 hours for attacking, 24 for defense, but like some sort of quick match. If you want to fight, you know, your opponent places 3 teams, you have some sort of a ban phase, or they don't allow GLs, or whatever the case may be. It's some sort of broadly accessible, quick matchup, I think would satisfy many players' desires for more on-demand playing. Sort of like what they're doing with raid changes, where you have a whole week, or I don't remember, 72 hours or something, to play the raid whenever you want. You don't have to do it exactly at a certain time. In some ways, GAC does satisfy this, but it's a long-term investment in setting your defense. If you really want to compete well against a player, you have to scout and spend time, and time is not something that most players have. With Conquest and the current raid together, I think the raid system will change this for the better, I hope. I'm pretty enthusiastic about it, or positive. But time management remains the biggest challenge for most players, I believe. So hopefully there could be some TB changes to change this before they introduce a new game mode that requires more time. But we'll see. I'm talking about this. I've just been talking about this. I'm enthusiastic, and I hope there's some other PvP focused or PvP centric changes coming to the game. I think that would be positive. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how the game is going. I love the balance changes. So it's not about like spending on the latest, greatest datacron, and it's not about making sure you have all the GLs. I mean, those are never going to not be important, but that would always be important. But it's nice to have alternatives. I think it just gives a lot more flexibility and fun in creating interesting offensive and defensive teams. Makes it more fun to play. So, I think for the last 20 minutes, Tasnex has been talking about Cal Kestis. So as I said, that's sort of a downside or a positive side, depending on your preference of his content. But funny seeing him we're talking about Carnival. So anyway, I feel very proud now. It's like 30 minutes for this video. I hope you found it interesting, educational a little bit, maybe a tiny bit entertaining. Nah, forget entertaining. Interesting and educational are helpful in some ways, what I'm going for. So good luck with your 5v5 prep. And yeah, good luck this season. Cheers.